Hello, everyone. This is Darcinovia here, and this is my review on the Lando Calrissian Adventures. Now, there was a time I was considering doing what I did with the Han Solo Adventures and reviewing the novels individually, but I felt like when looked at my notes, I'd be repeating myself, and I'd essentially be doing the same review three times. And I did look back at the Han Solo Adventures, and I feel like, you know what, I could have done this as one review instead of like three. So I'm delivering just one review on the trilogy that was written in the 1980s. Now, what is the Lando Calrissian Adventures? The Lando Calrissian Adventures are novels that, of course, focus on Lando Calrissian. Now, considering this is basically separate from the main story of what was going on at the time, because when this was published in the early 1980s. So, the Star Wars expanded universe that we know today wasn't established like we know it. Certain things that we would know today, like Sabak, which is the game that is like famous in the Star Wars expanded universe. In fact, West End Games was what actually greatly expanded upon it. In fact, this was the first Star Wars source to actually have the most famous card game in Star Wars. It would not exist had it not been for this novel. Not to be confused for Pizak, for those who are KOTOR fans. Sabak and Pizak are not the same game. Now, what makes like the Lando Calrissian Adventures? Why should you read them in 2022? Why? Well, first, I'm just going to give my personal feelings about these books. Now, before I considered reading the Lando Calrissian Adventures, I didn't think that Lando would be an interesting enough character to basically read about. And I held off on these, slept on these for years, which, in my opinion, was a mistake. Because if there's one thing I will have to say about the Star Wars Expanded Universe, it sucks that how much it sleeps on Lando. Lando Calrissian, in my opinion, is a great character. And I think he's one of the best Star Wars characters. And it's a shame you have such an interesting character barely be focused on in Star Wars. Yeah, he plays a role in various novels, but there isn't really many stories that really focus on Lando, which is him as the center character. And I don't understand why. I mean, Han Solo, you know, they managed to write tons of stories of Han Solo. Why couldn't you done the same for Lando? Who knows what kind of crazy adventures this guy went on before he met Han. Of course, according to the Reader's Companion, this takes place like after the Hutt Gambit. So, yeah, but this is when he had the Millennium Falcon. In fact, I think the way this novel was written made it very easy and to actually place this at whatever point in the timeline they wanted, as long as it's before New Hope. Because unlike other Star Wars stories that were published before the Thrawn trilogy, this book didn't really need any retconning at all. None of these stories did. They fit perfectly with the expanded universe, considering it was separate from the main narrative of what was going on at the time. The Lando Calrissian Adventures managed to do pretty much whatever it wanted without conflicting with the movies. And you know what? Considering that when this book was released, all we had going on for Lando was basically Empire Strikes Back. And I don't know if Return of the Jedi was out yet when these novels were out. But this was definitely something to get people basically hooked while they're waiting for the next movie. And unfortunately, these novels would be the last Star Wars related books that Star Wars fans would be getting for like almost a decade. Yeah, there'd be some comics that be published here, in Marvel, and some stuff from West End Games in the late 80s. But the Lando Calrissian Adventures was the last of this era of the Star Wars expanded universe. And honestly, I think that's a shame. Because I think the Lando Calrissian Adventures, I think a lot of fans sleep on these. And it's a shame that they do. Because they're good books. They really are good books. And I think each one of these books are great, in my opinion. I think this trilogy is severely underrated. But why do I like these books? Well, Lando Calrissian is one of those characters that barely gets any focus in the novels. Yeah, he does play a role in various books in the New Republic and the New Jedi Order series, and he makes some appearances throughout most of the timeline. But it's rare that we get stories that actually have Lando without the Skywalkers. Like, I think Lando's like cast of characters in this book were interesting characters, and it's a shame that they don't really appear outside of this book. I think all the crazy shit that Lando did in these books was, it's like, wow. One thing I found very interesting is Lando has the tendency, when he's left to his own devices, to explore ancient civilizations. And when it comes to science fiction, if there's one thing I really do love, is when you have characters and stories explore ancient civilizations that have existed for thousands of years. And I think Lando is a perfect fit for that, considering the kind of character he is. And it make me realize, you know what? Maybe Lando's storyline in the Black Fleet Crisis isn't so bad after all. Because in these books, Lando basically visits civilizations that have existed for thousands of years. And I enjoy this aspect. And I think the author who like wrote these novels, L. Neil Smith, did a great job of characterizing Lando. He felt like the character from the films. Like Brian Daley with Han Solo. I felt like I was hearing the voice of Billy D. Williams every time I read his dialogue in these books. And I actually took my time with these. It took me a long time to get through these. Not because they're bad books, but because there's just no other books other than these that really focus on Lando. Yeah, you may have a book like in canon that focus on Lando, but he's not the main character. Yeah, you may have a new comic in canon that focuses on Lando, but that's only one comic. And let's be honest, it's canon. Like, you could take it or leave it. This is back in the golden age of the Star Wars literary verse, whatever you want to call it, Star Wars fiction, where I feel like authors actually did things that unfortunately a lot of modern authors didn't do, is actually be creative. I mean, these stories, I actually really enjoyed them. I thought they were really creative, and they didn't feel out of place for the Star Wars universe. And in fact, to be honest, I actually prefer these over the Han Solo adventure books. Because, yeah, the Han Solo adventure books, they're a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. I think they're good action and adventure stories. But for Lando, it's a different kind of story. Lando goes through other regions of the galaxy, explores like different cultures, different civilizations that have existed. It's like, this is the kind of stuff I didn't realize I liked in a Star Wars novel, but I do. And in all honesty, these novels, too many fans ignore these, in my opinion. Too many fans don't actually read these or discuss how good these books are. And in my opinion, I do feel like you have to read this as a trilogy, because each of these books continue from one book to the next one to the next one, because the Han Solo books, they're good, but for the most part they stand completely on their own, so they don't feel like a one continuous story like this does. I think all of the characters in here are really good, despite only appearing in this side of the Star Wars expanded universe. I actually enjoyed reading about a Lando that is inexperienced, that is not around the characters that we're all familiar with. I feel like that these stories actually, considering the fact that Lando, as we know him in the EU, wasn't established at this point, and all when this novel was written had to go on was the character as we had him in Empire Strikes Back. I feel like this basically did a home run. Not only did we had one good book with Lando, not and two, but three. Now, the only reason I haven't talked about the stories as much, because I feel like this is one of these books, like the Lando Calrissian Adventures, considering this is one of the rare occasions where there aren't any Lando books, in my opinion, in Legends, that were Lando's the primary character. And I feel like I don't want to spoil this kind of story for those who have yet to pick this up. The Lando Calrissian Adventures, like the Han Solo Adventures, luckily, is relatively easy to find. Like, there's so many different ways you can pick up these books now. I mean, they've been released in an omnibus form since the 1990s. It's like impossible to not find these books. Hell, you may be able to find a copy somewhere in a used bookstore. Like, this is probably one of the easiest Star Wars Expanded Universe novels to find. It's not what people would talk about when they say greatest Legends novels, but if I have to be real, if I had to talk about Legends novels that Star Wars Legends fans I think sleep on or don't talk about enough, it's the Lando Calrissian Adventures. For a good price, you get 3 books, and they're all great stories. I can't recommend these enough. Now, it should be obvious since I've talked about how much I enjoy these books. What is the rating for them? It's obvious at this point. I give it a classic rating because I think these books are classics. I actually think they're some of the best Star Wars material ever published. And I think it's some of the most creative Star Wars stories ever published. And if I have to be real, I'm actually have grown to have more of appreciation for the Star Wars Expanded Universe as time goes on. And if I have to be real, these books I think are good. They're really, really fucking good. And whatever you do, Lucasfilm, please, in the future, give these books the audiobook treatment and have Mark Thompson do it. Because having these be part of the Essential Legends series would be a godsend, giving these the audiobook treatment. So, without further ado, I will say for certain, the Lando Calrissian Adventures are the most underrated Star Wars books ever published. And I think more Star Wars fans who are fans of the EU should read them. Don't ignore these books. Don't sit on them. Stop wasting your time watching this review. Pick up a copy. Read these books, especially if you're a fan of the character of Lando. You will not regret it. I think they're underrated books that a lot of people just simply don't talk about. Anyway, this is Darth Sinovia over and out. Next time, I review Star Wars related content. I'm not going to spoil what it's going to be, but it's going to be fun. Anyway, see you guys later. And remember, these books are underrated classics. Don't sit on them. And that's the last thing I will say about these books. May the Force be with you, always.